Welcome to the Goalie Hacks Podcast, the show dedicated to providing elite tips, hacks, and strategies to take your game to the next level, where we help you become an elite goaltender, one hack at a time. And now, here's your host, Mike Santaguida.
Bang, bang, let's go. Welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Mike Santaguida, and I just want to start off with some big, quick announcements. In the last few weeks, the amount of people joining my mentorship program and the amount of people supporting my work has started to get rolling, and I can't thank all these people enough. And I want to wish a warm welcome and thank you to my three newest patrons this week: Stefan Satanovic from Chicago, Illinois, Jude Rondina from Richmond Hill, Ontario, up in Canada, and the famous Justin Goldman from the Goalie Guild, who was a guest on episode number 3 of the show, hailing from Castle Rock, Colorado, who is nice enough to pledge to my work. Thanks, Justin, and thank you so much to all these guys and the rest of my patrons for supporting my work. It honestly means the world to me, and I'm looking forward to continue to help everyone get to the next level, and I couldn't be more excited to continue to serve everyone as best as I can. We now have 13 Inner Circle members. The feedback has been awesome so far, and if you want a chance to join our private group chat where you get to interact with me and other goaltenders of all ages, and if you want to be a part of our monthly mentorship Zoom sessions where I give a talk and then open it up to Q&A from everyone, it really is an awesome opportunity to connect with me and other like-minded individuals in continuing to build and grow your game. So if you're looking to speed up your development, and if you're still stuck and maybe don't have a team, consider becoming a part of my mentorship program for some great value and as well as some great fun. Head to patreon.com/goaliehacks for more details, or also click the link included in the show notes to get started today. Shout out to NeuroTracker, our main sponsor on the show, and we're so close to opening the new NTX platform up to the public. They're just putting the finishing touches on the registration process, so keep your ears and eyes peeled for more details in the coming weeks. Also, if you want to be featured on the show and have your question answered live on the Goalie Hacks podcast by me, and I encourage everyone to think about their questions and maybe some things they're struggling with, and submit it to me if you want an opportunity to get your questions answered on the next Q&A podcast episode that I'm going to be putting together soon. So remember to submit your question. Head to speakpipe.com/goaliehacks. The link will also be under the podcast tab on my website at goaliehacks.com. And the link will also be in my bio on Instagram and Twitter, or you can just type in the URL into a web page to go right there, speakpipe.com/goaliehacks. And I encourage everybody to submit their questions. I love to feature you guys, my community members, on the show, and I love to get to the root of your problems. But without further ado, let's get into this week's episode. I know you guys are going to love the chat Brett and I had today. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Goalie Hacks podcast. I know I definitely say I'm always excited because I've had so many great guests on the show already and plan to have more. But today we come at you with a different perspective than we've had so far that I know you'll all enjoy. If you're looking to get an inside look into minor pro hockey and what it takes to be a champion, this episode is certainly for you. I'm really excited to be joined today by Brett Schaffer, the goalie coach for the 2019 SPHL champions, the Huntsville Havoc, and owner and head instructor of the Puck Stops here at Goaltending. Brett, how you doing, man? Thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, happy to be here. Happy to be on the show. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. Well, it's nice to finally meet you, man. I've been looking forward to this episode for some time. Obviously, I've put it off a little bit just because there's been a lot of work, going on in the works. But, I think that people just really have no idea what goes on behind the scenes in pro hockey and what it takes to get there and what it takes to not only get a job, but maintain a job. And I think there's no better place to start than the SPHL. But people are always sort of thinking about the majors, but the fact is it's hard to get an opportunity in the big leagues right off the bat. And most of us need to work our way up through the leagues and the ranks. And I just know that you'll be an excellent resource for people to listen to.
Awesome. Yeah, I appreciate it. And that's very true what you say. I mean, how many goalies really just start off and jump right into the NHL? I mean, it happens so rarely now. So a lot of that is the grooming process and the maturity process, and that does take place in the minors for sure.
Right. Well, I just want to say I love the work you're doing. Clearly, you guys are having success. You are personally having success with the guys you're working with, and congrats on your championship last year. I wish you and the team the best of luck going forward. But let's not waste any time, just because we have a lot to get over today. I got a lot of questions for you, so let's jump right in. Why don't you start off by telling my audience, who you are, what's your background, maybe give a little tidbit on what the SPHL is so people can get a better idea of the league, because obviously I think my audience is a little bit younger than like pro guys and stuff. So how you ended up in Huntsville as well.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's really not much as far as my playing career. I wouldn't even call it a career. It was pretty uneventful. I mean, I played rec hockey for 12 years since I was 4 years old. Played a little bit in college at a club level in Florida. So at the time, it wasn't necessarily very competitive. But I knew at about 16, 17 that, NHL wasn't happening for me. But I knew that I ultimately wanted to be in some way, shape, or form still involved with hockey. So for me, I figured just jump right into coaching at 16, 17, get a head start while other guys are still playing. And that's kind of what brought me here. I mean, obviously, there's some pieces in between. I started off coaching in Orlando, just working as kind of a goalie coach and really just a coach at the rink, doing everything from learn to skate programs to learn to play, coaching a rec hockey team, and kind of learning the ins and outs of coaching, but also learning how a rink operates in itself. And that was really important for me as well. I think just learning all facets of the game. Um, and from there, after I graduated college, I went back home to Palm Beach, Florida, and I really didn't know my next step in hockey. But again, I knew I wanted to stay involved, so I reached out to a local college that was kind of revamping their program, Florida Atlantic University, and they brought me out, and we started off with a bumpy year one, which was good for me to kind of see the growing pains and how it works and how you build up to being competitive as a team. And over the years, we drastically improved our record from, I think we started off, I want to say like 9-14. I could be very incorrect. And then we finished this year right now at 17-4-1, and that's 3 years later. So, it doesn't happen overnight. And then the way I got my SPHL gig was actually pretty unique if you want me to jump into that as well.
Mm-hmm.
So pretty much, you ever heard that thing like whenever that kid doesn't have a date at prom, if you ask out 100 girls, one will say yes? Well, that's exactly what I did. I emailed all 10 all coaches in the league, and I said, "Hey, you looking for a goalie coach?" And for the most part, every single one of them either didn't respond or kind of shrugged it off as not
Mm-hmm.
really interested. And then Coach Tulio for the Havoc was really the only one to respond with any like interest in it. But he had kind of like two stipulations. The first one he was wondering was, how is this going to work if you're in Palm Beach Gardens, West Palm, Florida, and we're in Huntsville, Alabama? Um, so that was the first obstacle he had. And the second one was he wasn't exactly sure how his goalies would take bringing in a goalie coach. So he wanted to make sure that the goalies were on board with it before they jumped in. And we kind of got over both of those things. And here we are.
So why don't you just give our audience a little bit better look into maybe what the SPHL is, where it's kind of located, the caliber, stuff like that.
Yeah, for sure. I think that unless you're like a big hockey nut, a lot of people don't really know about the SPHL. But it is the Southern Pro Hockey League, so it's primarily in the southeast of the United States. You've got teams in Illinois with Peoria, Quad City, and then it goes all the way down to Pensacola, Florida. But you've got teams scattered in the middle in Evansville, Knoxville, Huntsville, Macon. But it's really at this point, I think it's grown so much in like the last 4 or 5 years. Um, and people say at
Mm-hmm.
this point, it really is kind of like a development league for the coast. Um, and it's a lot of those guys can play in the coast. They're just missing a few things to their game. And I think that's really what's kind of holding them back. But for the most part, I would say it's extremely competitive. It's right below the ECHL. I think it's a lot better still right now than the FHL, only because the FHL still has all those kinks to work out as far as refereeing and those game issues that they need to clean up.
Mm-hmm.
Where the SPHL was about 10, 12 years ago, so I think that the FPHL is heading in the right direction as well. Because I think we were where they were probably
Mm-hmm.
10 years ago. And I think you can relate to that as well. I think you've seen how it's kind of cleaned up over the last few years.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I think it's funny that you mentioned that, just because a guy that I played with, he's been playing pro hockey for like 16 or 17 years, and he was actually in the SPHL, the inaugural season. So he kind of told me everything, like how it all developed. Like they were wearing like pennies, like they had nothing back then. So I think that a lot of people look down on those development leagues just because it's not the NHL. But I think that people need a place to play, right? So these minor pro leagues facilitate that. They facilitate a place to play for good players that maybe need to develop a little more or sort of like prove themselves. And I think we definitely are heading in the right direction in both leagues. And I think the SPHL, like you said, has really started to thrive the last several years, from the support from the community, just across the board. I mean, it's becoming a much more well-known league. And I think maybe that has to do as well with just sort of the caliber of players coming in now. You got like tons of Division 1 guys, major junior guys coming in there now. And we'll get to that later, in the conversation, stuff like that. But I think for now we'll sort of move forward a bit. I just obviously you've had success the last couple of years. So I kind of want to dig here a bit to show people, what it takes not to just be a champion, but to maintain a job in pro hockey. I just want to start off first by asking you maybe a couple things in terms of your core approach to the game that you emphasize to your guys. What do you stress the most to your goalies, either mentally or physically?
Yeah, for sure. Great question. As far as core approach, I think the first thing they need to look at is the game in itself, and there are multiple aspects to it. The physical and technical side, and then especially as a goalie, the emotional and mental side. For me, I've really spent the last few years kind of looking at the emotional, mental side. Um, on the pro side, especially because there's going to be a lot of things thrown at you besides pucks when you're at the pro level, and you need to make sure that you're not just physically fit, but you need to be emotionally and mentally fit, and that's just as important. Um, I think if we're really going to break it down for me, the first thing is kind of having a keen understanding of what variables you can and cannot control. Sorry. Um, for instance, you can't really control who's on their team, what the ice conditions are like, or even how your teammates are playing for more reason. And the more you boil it down, I think the more that you realize that as a goalie, there's very few things that you really control in the game. And the quicker you realize that, I think that actually it becomes a lot more simple. The game becomes a lot more simple, and it really lets you focus in on just being a goalie and focusing on what you can control. I think that's a big step for me. Um, as far as and they need to and they should kind of go down the list and think about things that they can control. For instance, you can kind of control your body language, how you react when you make a big save, and how you react when you let in a goal. Do you want to show those emotions or not? What's your body language look like? How are you preparing for games, both emotionally and physically? How do you respond under certain pressure? Do you rise to the occasion, or do you kind of shiver away from it? Um, and obviously, you can also control how you play. I mean, as a goalie, you should be pretty keenly aware of, okay, what's my skating like? How's my rebound control? What's my angle, my depth? If those are things you can work on. Those are variables that you can control. What you can't control is, the politics of the game, the height of a goalie, certain things like that. There's no point really spending any time stressing about things you can't control. And that's, for me, one of the biggest things about pro hockey is because you need to be so focused.
You talk a lot about focusing on the things you can control. And I think that it's sort of like that's such a huge pitfall that like younger kids fall into is, you know, pointing the finger a lot at things and sort of and it meshes so much with your own thoughts. And I know this just from growing up and even certain periods in my time where you're kind of struggling a bit. You know what I mean? Where you're like, oh, my D aren't doing this, or oh,
Hmm.
so and so isn't doing this. Oh, we're not playing good, or whatever it is. And I think that the conversation needs to be more around, and relating specifically to like doing your job is like, worry about what you control, which is stopping pucks, right? And I think that when we take into consideration, like evaluating ourselves in our game, a lot of goalies sort of lose their way a bit, like when they're evaluating themselves. And I think that the best way to evaluate yourself and to focus on the things that matter is, um, you know, making sure that you're stopping all the ones that you can, right? And, the question pops up, could I have
Hmm.
stopped that shot? And whether it's a 2-on-0 or a 3-on-1 or a breakaway, you get 10 of them a game. I think that we have to kind of have that conversation with ourselves and, really be objective about things and sort of, like you said, um, worry about what we can control. So I think for some young goalies, what are some things that, you can either say to yourself or do mentally to kind of put you in that right mindset. So that way you're sort of just worrying about what you can control and you're kind of not focused on the things that are distractions.
Yeah, good question. I think for younger goalies too, especially, half the battle is figuring out for them and understanding what they can and can't control. I think at a younger age, you have a lot harder of a time processing those types of situations. And I think the easiest way for a younger goalie to look at that is, what are things that you can do? Okay. You can control your work ethic. You can control how much time you want to spend prepping for games. You can control what you're eating before the game. You can control how much you're stretching and getting ready. You can't control what others are doing, and I think that you just need to simplify it as, what can you do and what can others do. And as a young goalie, you need to make that list of, okay, what can I do before a game? What can I do during a game? What can't I do? And if something you can't do, then you need to just kind of put it on the back burner.
So, you talked about your core approach a little bit, and I think this leads right into sort of my next question, which is, what do you think when it comes to mental preparation and consistency, right? Like, how important are those things when it comes to pro hockey, and why? And sort of what do you do with your guys?
I think that's super important. For me, I think consistency, you kind of said it right there, but you need to be consistent. You need to make sure that you have a plan and you're executing that plan. So it comes down to preparation. How much you sleep in the night before? What are you putting in your body the night before? You know, are you prepped? Are you confident in everything you're doing? And getting the small things out of the way, like, are your skates sharpened? Do you have your backup stuff? Like, leave nothing else to focus on but the game. And I think that's a big part of the preparation. And then obviously there's things like the physical preparation, the mental preparation. For me, on like a game day, I keep it really simple with Max and Micah. I don't want to give them too much, so I think maybe 3 to 5 things, and five is usually pushing it. I'm usually thinking things like, beat passes on your feet. Make sure that you're putting pucks in the corner when you can't control them. Make sure that you're finding pucks through screens and just things like that, man. And compete, 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 and whatever happens, happens.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I kind of resonate a lot sort of with the prep stuff because I mean, obviously I'm a little bit of a smaller guy, so I think the room for error is a lot smaller for me, and honestly being both mentally and physically prepared have been just an enormous part of my success. And you talked about gear and sleep and stuff like that. For me, like when my skates aren't sharp, my movement sucks or whatever, like if I don't figure out my gear, I need that stuff to be top notch. And then, I don't think people talk enough about sleep the night before and game day. And I'm a huge believer in taking a nap, and it's into my older age, it's become a little more apparent of, how much I need that. But I think, you know, if people are sort of struggling to find that consistency, or, they don't really know what to do in terms of mental preparation, either on game day or during the week, what's some advice that you could give, some younger goalies to maybe work toward that, work toward building a routine, whatever that is?
Yeah, so I think the first thing would be, if you're a younger goalie, is just start jotting down things that are working for you and aren't working for you. If the day before you had pasta and chicken, or I mean the game day of the game you had pasta and chicken and it worked for you, write that down so you know going forward, like, hey, this is the food that clearly works for me. Then more importantly, like, like, all right, I had 8 hours of sleep. How do you feel in the morning? Are you groggy? Are you energetic? Okay, then either you need to dial it up or dial it down. In Huntsville, we do have these things that they're put on the goalies. I mean, not on the goalies, but on the players, and it tracks their sleeps, and it'll give them a score from 1 through 10 on how well they slept, and that does have a lot of correlation. Typically, when you see guys in the 8.5, nines, they're getting good sleep, and they're productive from start to finish in the game. But yeah, I think as a younger guy, it's you obviously, and especially with technology, I would say limit the amount that you're on your phone. I would say,
Mhm.
make sure that you have I would say at a younger age too, have a list of things that you want in your bag and unpack your bag and pack it back. That way you have everything. So that's one less thing to worry about.
Mhm.
Um, and visualization is key. I think at the younger age, you need to visualize yourself making big saves, having a successful
Mhm.
game, and I think that plays a really big role into it. I think that your mindset, people don't realize it's so powerful, whether negative or positive.